Good morning to our participants in the US. Good afternoon to our participants in Europe. Welcome to our expert discussion examining the transatlantic economy on a local level. Today, we are showcasing the dynamic of economic engagement between Northern Virginia and the city of Hamburg in Germany. I'll get back to that aspect later on. My name is Paul Linnertz, and I'm the director of the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung Office to the United States of America, based here in Washington, D.C. We are hosting this event together with our partner, the Northern Virginia Regional Commission. Our event this morning is the latest in our ongoing collaboration with NVRC, highlighting transatlantic ties on a regional and local level. I want to thank NVRC's Executive Director, Robert Lazaro, and Dr. Dale Medeiros, Senior Regional Planner at NVRC, for our close working relationship and their long-standing commitment to strengthening ties between Northern Virginia and various German cities and regions. We will hear from Bob and Dale shortly. My sincere thanks goes to our panel of experts today. Dr. Dan Hamilton, who serves as Senior Non-Resident Fellow at the Brookings Institution and as Senior Fellow at the Johns Hopkins University Science Foreign Policy Institute. And Marion Marquez, she's the Acting Deputy Director at Arlington Economic Development in Northern Virginia. Unfortunately, and this is what I mentioned earlier on, why I have to get back to the issue of Hamburg, unfortunately, our panelist from Hamburg, Caroline Berg, she is project director of international investment at Hamburg Invest. She had to cancel last minute. She felt sick. That's very unfortunate, but I'm looking forward anyway to a great discussion with our distinguished panelists. With this, I will hand things over to Bob Lazaro. Good morning, Bob. The floor is yours.
Good morning, Paul, and thank you. It's a pleasure to work with you and your team on this webinar. I'm Bob Lazaro, Executive Director of the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and good morning and guten Abend to our friends in Germany. The Commission is a consortium of 13 local governments representing more than 2.5 million residents. The GDP of our region in 2020 dollars is more than $228 billion, which is nearly 42% of the GDP of Virginia, larger than 25 states, and is the 49th largest economy in the world. I'm pleased to be joined today with colleagues from the Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Johns Hopkins University, and Arlington County on this timely conversation about the transatlantic economy and the challenges, and more importantly, the opportunities we mutually face. Thank you for joining with us today. It is now my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Dale Medeiros.
Thank you so much, Paul. Thanks, Bob. I'm Dale Medeiros, and I have the privilege of working with Bob here at NVRC as a senior regional planner. And among the roles I have is to help NVRC coordinate global engagement efforts for this region. And that's important because, like no other time before, local governments like ours in Northern Virginia are being called upon to act on the global stage. They're being asked to address really, really important challenges that directly affect them, like climate change, energy, public health, social inclusion, public safety, immigration, infrastructure, education, but also, and perhaps most importantly, economic development. And it's safe to say that global economic engagement by local governments is now a necessity. It's not an option. But sometimes the international work by local governments, it's not done in the most structured or strategic or purposeful context. And generally speaking, international work by local governments could use more staff support, could use stronger budgets, but also strategies and priorities that guide the staff, that guide the budgets and program development that fundamentally meets the demands of Main Street. And there tends to be a lack of understanding, I think, about one of the most important consequential elements of global engagements by local governments. And that's this dynamic of investment and connectivity between commerce, trade, and other aspects. So raising awareness about global economic engagement is really, really important for several reasons. An important driver behind creating this webinar and the partnerships. For example, in 2021, Germany invested over $636 billion into the US economy. It's the second largest investor in the United States. It was also the second largest investor in the Commonwealth of Virginia. And as we'll hear later from Marion Marquez in Arlington County, Some of the data with which she's been working suggests that Germany is among the largest foreign investors in Arlington County. So the influence of this dynamic of these activities is huge on our local governments and on our region. As one of the largest investors in Germany, German firms affect the US and Virginia's energy economy, for instance. We see this in Siemens Gamesa's investment in offshore wind off Virginia Beach. This is the largest offshore wind farm in the United States. Or Volkswagen's and Siemens and Electrify America's investment in electric vehicle infrastructure. And out of all of this, we're starting to understand, for instance, that foreign investment from firms like those in Germany support high wage, the gig economy of our region. The Global Alliance reported that international companies pay wages that are on average about 22% higher than their US counterparts. The Global Business Alliance also reports that international businesses account for about 19% of all corporate research and development in the United States. In our regions like ours, that's incredibly important. So making clear of all of these activities at the local level is really important. And Northern Virginia is very connected and interdependent, as we heard in the statistics that Bob just shared with us. So the extent to which local authorities more clearly understand this engagement, the more capable they will be able to react strategically and to capitalize on the opportunities, but also mitigate against potential threats. So to help shed light on this often overlooked part of the global engagement in general and transatlantic relations in particular, we've invited two experts. I'm also very happy to say my friends, to share their research experiences and perspectives of how foreign investment and other forms of economic engagement play out in the US, but also at the local level. And then, as Paul said, unfortunately, we just got word at the last minute that Dr. Carolina Berg from Hamburg had to cancel involvement. But we're very, very confident that the stories that we're going to be able to share with you will create a clear understanding about just how relevant the relationship is and how it plays out, importantly, at the local level. So it's my pleasure to introduce first Dan. Dan's a senior resident non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution and a senior fellow at the Foreign Policy Institute at Johns Hopkins University's School of Advanced International Studies, where he also serves as a Richard von Weizsäcker Professor and as the Austrian Marshall Plan Foundation Professor for the period 2012 to 2020. He's the president of the Transatlantic Leadership Network, and in 2020, he directed the Global Europe Program at the Woodrow Wilson Center. And he formerly served as Deputy Assistant Secretary of State for European Affairs. And together with Joseph Quinlan, he's the author of an award-winning publication series that is updated or report and research every year, The Transatlantic Economy. I encourage you to run, not walk, to get a copy. And then it's also my pleasure to introduce Marion Marquez. Marion is the Acting Deputy Director for Arlington Economic Development, AED. And in this role, she oversees Arlington's efforts to business recruitment and retention, international trade, entrepreneur support, and catalyzing the innovation economy. Among other achievements, Marion's contributed heavily to the successful recruitment of Amazon's HQ2 to Arlington and standing up to the county's international and business retention strategies. Prior to joining AED, Marion held roles in the private and public sectors, including several years with ExxonMobil, as well as the federal government, the US Trade and Development Agency. Her love of all things international stems from a childhood spent as a diplomatic brat in Hungary, Germany, Mexico, and Austria. As a native Arlingtonian, however, she was thrilled to be home and working to make Arlington an even better place to live and work. Marion holds a BA in Russian Studies from Stanford University and master's degree in international business from the Fletcher School at Tufts University. And before turning things over to Dan, just a tiny bit of housekeeping. Please, if you have any questions, enter them into the Q&A box and we'll read them chronologically. Thank you very much for your time. We're really looking forward to this. We want this to be a form of engagement, so please put questions into the Q&A box. And Dan, thank you very much. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Dale. It's a pleasure to be here. So as Dale said, my colleague Joe Quinlan and I do an annual report on the transatlantic economy. It covers all the jobs, trade, and investment flows between Europe and each of the 50 states, plus the other way around, U.S. commerce with all the EU countries, plus the UK, Turkey, Norway, Switzerland, and so on. So it tries to keep us abreast of the latest data. You can just go to transatlanticrelations.org and you can find the full report there, plus a breakdown for each state. So my job, as I understand it, is to give you a context of why we should care and how to think about the transatlantic economy or even our engagement in international commerce. Because often I think in national capitals, I like to say the best kept secret in Washington is often how the economy actually works. And I think that's true in many national capitals, but also in the media. There's a tendency to equate commerce with just trade and only trade in goods. And so you tend to skew the understanding people have of what really matters to their livelihoods. So I'm going to give you with some slides, a big picture, and then we're going to drill down more to the regional economy. So if I could start the slides and just give the context this year, we've had ups and downs, and the title of our chapter in our study this year was Pain and Resilience, because next slide, please. You see that we are familiar with the pain points. Next slide, please. This is what we're dealing with this year. Of course, COVID is still with us, despite what the president said. Russia's war in Ukraine is just disrupting so many things. Energy crisis, particularly in Europe. We're all coping with inflation. We have congested supply chains. China's on the fence in terms of whether it will support Russia or not, but it'll have huge implications if it tries to evade the sanctions that have been imposed on Russia that have ripple effects on our economies. So we're dealing with all of that. But the interesting deeper trend, especially from the data, that shows how resilient our economies are. Next slide, please. And that we are basically proving to be each other's resilient economic base by which we can address all those challenges, because we are each other's most important commercial partners by far, despite what you might read in the media. $6 trillion economy, 16 million workers on each side of the Atlantic owe their jobs directly from just the investment flows that go across the Atlantic. If you add trade and other things, it'll be far higher than that. We account for 2/3 of the world's investment stock, half of the world's personal consumption, and 1/3 of world GDP in terms of purchasing power. So the notion that somehow the world economy has shifted away from the transatlantic core is in many ways wrong. Or where it does shift, sometimes the media and the politics don't quite get it right. So let me just take you through what I mean by a couple of those points. Next slide, please. If you look at the latest data from last year, obviously it's changing. We had all-time highs, transatlantic trade in goods, over $1 trillion. U.S. investment flows to Europe hit an all-time high, and historical high. And the same way in terms of the way money is being earned. Most American companies abroad earn most of their money in Europe, not elsewhere. Almost 3 times more than what they earn in all of Asia. And the same is true in terms of European companies that are based here in the United States. Their earnings hit an all-time high last year. So, the economy is underneath all of this turbulence. It's a strong foundation. And it's rebounding from some of the turbulence of the previous years. So we're in a good position, basically, to cope with what are admittedly quite a few shocks that we're having to face. Next slide, please. So if you look at this in some important ways, often, as I say, the media tends to, if you read about a story about trade, they tend to mainly talk about trade in goods. So trade in goods is one part of trade, but it ignores services, which is a huge part of our economies. And more importantly, it ignores investment flows, which at least across the Atlantic actually drive the trade. It's not trade drives investment, it's the other way around. If you go to Economics 101 and sit in a course, the professor will tell you trade drives commerce. It's just not true anymore, at least across the Atlantic. Investment drives the trade. And if you put investment, foreign affiliates, we call them sales, and the trade together, you see that left bar, which is the transatlantic commercial relationship. It's just by far outweighs anything else we have with anybody else, including within NAFTA, including with all of Central and South America, and most importantly, far more important than with Asia and the Pacific. Next slide, please. And if you boil this down into some specifics, the digital economy is becoming the economy. This is something that is overtaking, so much of our accounting of how we even think about this. If you look at that big bar there, that's Europe. And what it is US trade in services that can be produced digitally. And this is skyrocketing now. It's becoming sort of a key part of how we operate around the world. And it is becoming so important that it's dwarfing many of the other kinds of flows that we have thought about. It was stimulated, of course, also by the pandemic, but it's deeper than that. So that big blue bar is US exports and services to Europe. It's almost 3 times what it is to the entire Latin American, Caribbean, and double what it is to Asia and the Pacific. Europe is our most important export partner in that area, also imports. So, and we have a surplus in this area. People like to talk about the US trade deficit, but in this area, US has a surplus. So, and it's deeply tied to these investment flows because companies are trading within themselves across the Atlantic. So next slide, please. This becomes important if you look the other way around. These are now the European side of the picture in terms of European exports and imports of services. And you see, again, clearly within Europe, European countries do most of this commerce with themselves. So that's the big top bar, as if that would be like within the United States, sort of for ours. But if you look below that, other Europe is mainly the UK. So, and since we've now broken that out from the EU, since the UK has left, that's important. But the United States is next, 122 billion euros, which is more than with the UK, and it's far more than with Asia. So one country, the United States, is a much more important trading partner in the services dimension than all of Asia for Europe. And that's not what you often read about. On the right-hand side, you say who sends things to Europe. And again, you see the United States there is number 1, more than all the rest of Europe to the EU. And it's 5 times what all of Asia exports to the European Union. Just one country, the United States. So again, that recenters some of our mental images, perhaps, of how this economy works. Next slide, please. This one might look a little complicated, but if you just split it in half and you look to the left 4 bars, that is US trade and services globally, and the 4 right bars are just with Europe. So my point is that investment flows are really the key. Affiliate sales, you see there, that is, Siemens Gamesa, as Dale said, in Northern Virginia selling things in the United States. Or it is 3M or, an American company based in Germany selling goods and services there. Companies prefer to do that. Instead of sending stuff across the ocean, they prefer to set up shop next to their customers across India, in the other region. And that is increasingly what drives our connections. And that is particularly important in the services economy, where most jobs are. Almost 90% of the US economy, the jobs are in services, not goods, and the same in Europe. So if you want to, employ people and have better jobs, you're looking to where our services flow, not just the goods flow. So the left 2 bars, far 2 bars, are just the trade in services themselves, but those next 2 bars, the big ones, are the investment flows. You see how important investment flows are. They're also same basic proportion for goods. That's globally. And then if you look to the right 4 bars, you see, again, the last far end is the services by affiliates. And then the middle there in the right is just the export. So you see, investment flows here, is my basic point, is really driving our economy, both in goods and in services. So it really matters who invests in your local economy. and where they're coming from. Next slide, please. It shows that international trade increasingly is underpinned by the flows of data. And here, again, the top countries, all of them, are the United States and European countries. China doesn't figure in that. Japan doesn't figure in that. No Asian country is involved in this. The UK is also in that top tier. They calculate it differently. That's why there's no bar for them, but they are still also within that. So that's the future. The future is the digital economy, and transatlantic digital flows are about 55% greater than trans-Pacific flows. So it's really important to know, not only this is not a legacy economy, the old US-European relationship, it's still vibrant and important for the future. And the really new story that's starting to develop is the transatlantic energy economy. This was not a story a few years ago, but because of major developments that are happening, this has now become perhaps one of the most critical partnerships in the world. I'll just give you a couple quick slides on that. Next slide, please. You see here on the next slide that you can see on the right saying the red is the United States. This was just till last year, and it's this year that things really took off. But last year, the United States emerged as the largest supplier of liquefied natural gas in the world, and also to Europe. And Russia, Qatar, the others are important. But in terms of this one type of fuel, the US is really emerging. And when Russia next invaded Ukraine last February, US supplies surged, even as Europe has now made decisions to throttle back on their dependence on Russian supplies. So now just US LNG supplies to Europe alone are bigger than all of Russian natural gas supplies through their pipelines to Europe. So we're talking so much about the pipelines and everything in Europe, but US now is far more important to Europe in terms of its energy than Russia. And that'll continue because Europe has made a fundamental decision to wean itself off of Russian dependencies. But it's not a one-way street. If you, next slide, please. If you look the other way, you see the largest investor in the US energy economy is Germany. And if you look below that, Canada is important, Japan is important, but really it's still other European economies that are important. And this is both fossil-free and fossil fuel economies in the United States. So it's the whole energy picture. But it is important to get centered and to understand again that European investment, again, the investment flows are what's driving things. And that's also not the fossil, like LNG, fossil fuel economy. It's the next economy. It is the renewables economy and the new types of energy transitions we are both making together in the US and Europe. And it's important that to understand that the major foreign investors in the US energy economy in this space are also from Europe, mainly from Germany. So if we're going to make an energy transition, we're going to do it with some innovations and help from the investments that European companies are making in the US energy innovation economy. It works the other way around. In fact, it's even more dramatic the other way around. Next slide, please. In Europe, they have long-term contracts for renewable energy, 5-year, 10-year contracts. And so this is a chart of the companies that have signed those contracts. And you see 5 of the top 10 purchasers of renewable energy in Europe are US companies. Europe is not going to make its energy transition work without the participation of US companies. And 4 of the 5 are in solar and wind. And so it's really critical to see that we are deeply tied now in the energy economy, not only the old legacy economy where we're trying to shift our dependencies, especially for Europe, but in the next economy, we will be the forefront of that if we can harness our activities, particularly in our innovation economy, because R&D links, research and development links across the Atlantic are far deeper than any other connection either of us has anywhere else in the world. So back to the basic point, a lot of people talk about China. And China is, of course, an important economy in very critical areas to both the United States, Germany, Europe. But sometimes the narrative isn't quite right. So let me take a quick look at that. Next slide, please. My quick analogy is the commercial ties between Europe and China are a two-lane street. Landstrasse, the Germans would call it. It's a country road full of goods, and it's crowded, it's congested, and if you have an accident on a crowded road like that, you're in trouble. And in recent years, the European Union and China have tried to build a third lane. Next slide, please, an investment lane. But that got stuck because of China's human rights practices. It has sanctioned members of the European Parliament, the very body that has to approve this investment agreement. It's in the deep freeze. So it's a big construction site in the middle of that highway, and it's not going anywhere. And often in Europe, I hear this narrative, including by government officials, even Germany, that say China is Europe's most important commercial partner. It's simply not true. And the best analogy I can make is the next slide, which is instead of a two-lane country road, our relationship is a 12-lane Autobahn. It's trading goods just like the two-lane road, but it's also jobs. So many more jobs than the Europe-China or US-China relationship provides. The trade and services that I dwelled on earlier are exclusively almost transatlantic. We are basically the only real services economies in the world, except Australia, Canada, really. Even Japan is not really a services economy. And that's been part of its reason why it has never sort of kicked off, and it seems to always be in the doldrums, is because they never developed the services economy that the US and Europe have. The digital connections I mentioned are far and away more important across the Atlantic. The investment flows are the driver, and then the innovation economy that I mentioned are simply the most intense. European companies provide 2/3 of all the R&D investments coming from abroad into the US economy. So where they choose to invest in innovation in the United States really will matter. Next slide, please. So the key takeaways that I have from all of this is to recenter our mental image. Europe and the United States are simply each other's most important trading partners alone. Trade in goods and services, 1.1 trillion euros last year, 42% more than their trade with China. And yet the German Statistical Agency for 5 years in a row issues a report every year saying China is their most important trading partner. It's only because they're only measuring trade in goods. So it's actually just incorrect. And it skews much of our debate. And so if you look at the investment flows in addition to the services, you see US investment in Europe 4 times more than in the entire Asia Pacific region. European investment stock in the United States 10 times more than what the Europe has invested in China. 3 times more than what the Asians invest in the United States. And you can see that these figures really are really quite important. The one reason why China is on the fence about Russia's invasion is that they realize that their connections to each of us are far more intense than anything they have with Russia. And that's why, to the extent China will not step over the line on the sanctions, is because they know where their economic future probably lies. And that's still with us, actually. Okay, next slide. So in terms of the policy, the US and the European Union have created a Trade and Technology Council, and they are working now in some of these future areas, trying to harness our energies, clean technologies, ICT and cloud, semiconductors, artificial, to get rules of the road down. They're based on our core values. And so that's a work in progress, but it is a developing agenda that can be an affirmative one that harnesses our economy going forward. Next slide. And finally, to bring it back to Virginia before I pass it on, if you look at the data from at least the last year's data, I would calculate about 400,000 jobs in Virginia are reliant on healthy commerce with Europe. The core is investment flows, as I said, directly tied. European companies investing in Virginia account for that many jobs, but that's just a sample. You have to add in exports, imports, distributors, secondary kind of suppliers to companies. All of those, that whole stream of a network tied to those investment flows brings me to about 400,000, and that's a 30% jump in the last 10 years. So it's on the upswing. Three-fourths of all foreign affiliate jobs in Virginia are provided by Europe, and the largest sources of the real, greenfield, like really completely new investment, are both UK and German companies. And then you see the goods trade there, and you see that Virginia exports, much more goods to Europe than it does to China. And I realize our colleague from Hamburg is not here today, but if you look at Hamburg and you look at, it's a similar picture in terms of Hamburg's regional dynamics, that it's so dependent on healthy international links. And we can talk about that a bit more, but they're really particularly important in where the US is concerned. So let me stop there, and happy to engage in the further discussion.
Thank you so much, Dan. That was spectacular. As Marion starts to gear up with her presentation, I'd just like to request anybody with questions, park them in the Q&A box. There's less to digest at the end of the discussion, but thanks. Marion, are you ready? You're muted.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Can hear you loud and clear, thanks.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you. Well, first, I would like to thank NVRC and Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for having me today. It's my pleasure to join this very important conversation, and I just learned a lot from Dr. Hamilton's presentation and found it very thought-provoking, so I may have some questions myself. But I think, just to first introduce myself before I get into my presentation, I'm the acting deputy director for Arlington Economic Development, and I'll explain a bit more about who we are in a moment here. But I think this is a really good application, maybe, of some of the content and themes that Dr. Hamilton was touching on in his presentation, and you can see a little bit of a case study at a local level. So first, for those in the audience who may be from outside this area and in Europe or elsewhere, just a little bit about our community here in Arlington. We are just across the river from Washington, D.C., the nation's capital and the first jurisdiction in the state of Virginia. We are about 5 minutes away by car from downtown Washington, D.C., a small county by many measures, 26 square miles, but our economic footprint and engine is much stronger than that. I'll talk a little bit about our commercial market in a moment. We have 236,000 people. Our daytime population employment is a little bit less than that, and nearly 43 million square feet of commercial office space, which puts us on par with many of the major metropolitan areas that you think of when you think of big urban corridors. Another thing we're very proud of here is our diversity, and as Dale mentioned in my introduction, I come from a diplomatic family, spent a lot of time overseas, and so this is something I'm passionate about. One of the reasons I love to live here and work here. But in our public school system, we have kids from over 145 countries, speaking 90 languages. And looking at our economy, as you would guess, by virtue of where we sit, we have a strong federal government presence that is a key foundational sector for us, along with all the contractors that support federal work, also professional services, and then technology, which I know Dan touched on in his presentation, but this is something that my team has been very focused on, growing the presence of technology, especially in these nascent industries like artificial intelligence and machine learning, to really diversify our business economy away from pure federal government. This is just a snapshot of our department, Arlington Economic Development. I'm currently sitting in the director's office. we are undergoing some transition here. Ordinarily, I'm running our business investment team, which you see highlighted here in red. We're about 50 people across the department, and we are part of local government. So this is a snapshot. I joined Arlington Economic Development in 2015. It was a time when our leadership was very aggressive about going out and diversifying our economy. We had been very hard hit by movements within the federal sector and decreased spending in the defense budget. And we had a lot of empty buildings and a lot of federal tenants that left the area. And Arlington County's leadership said, you know, what we need to do is give additional resources, create some new positions, and go out and really proactively market Arlington County as a great place to do business, to locate, to grow. I joined the team at that time in a position that I'll speak about on the next slide. But it was a huge effort. Over those 7 years, we worked with 279 companies to attract them to Arlington County or to keep them in Arlington County for a total of 17 million square feet. Which, if you recall, the fact that our whole economy is about 43 million is very impressive, and 92,000 jobs that we were able to attract here or create, protect, and keep them in Arlington County. And you can see on the right here some of the major companies that we have worked with or attracted here throughout the time, and a couple big examples. Lidl's North America headquarters is in Arlington County. We attracted them here in 2015. Nestle's North America headquarters we attracted from Los Angeles area. And this picture that you see here, which is known as the Helix, is a rendering of what will be built on Amazon's second headquarters, which is a project that we in Arlington County competed with. I forget the total figure. I think it was 238 cities and counties around the world to attract that big project, and which we won in 2018. And has been a bright light for us during the pandemic and the pandemic's impact on office. But I just wanted to share with you a little bit about the work that we do. So this is a look back in time to the time when I joined this team, the business investment team in Arlington County. And I've circled here in red the position that I was hired to take. And it was really focused on international and building up an international strategy for the county. It's hard to believe, at least it was for me coming in 7 years ago, that Arlington County didn't have an international strategy, just by virtue of where we sit and what an international community we have here and being right across the river from Washington, D.C. And I think that points to perhaps the mentality that, well, we are effectively part of D.C. and will continue to be a great location for international companies. And so we don't really have to work at it. At the time I came in, there was a shift in mentality about that because our economy was frankly hurting. And so this position was created to really start to build up an international strategy. My background is in international trade and development. And so I was brought on to do that for the county. And this was starting from a place where there was really very little data available on the international companies that were here, jobs, basically starting from scratch. And I'll talk a little bit more about that process. But you can see the parts of the team here when I was coming in that I had available to work with, including our business intelligence unit, which was critical in gathering some of this data. So I set about a mission to develop at least the foundation for what could be our international strategy, and that's both foreign direct investment, so international business attraction, and also international trade. The data that was shared in the presentation just before this was incredible, and I wish I had my hands on some of that at the time. But what I saw was a huge opportunity. The role that I came into had support from leadership in the county and within the department. I had resources, including a dedicated budget and staff to help me build out a strategy. And, I mentioned the business intelligence unit and the databases that we have here within AED. And also, I think I knowing what a strong market we were and what a strong brand Arlington has and our proximity to Washington, D.C., I knew we had a very good value proposition for attracting companies like Nestle, Thales, Lidl, Leonardo DRS, Italian defense contractor. So those were the opportunities. With it came challenges. at the time I was hired, our director had come from other communities in the region, Washington, D.C., Prince George's County, and had a lot of success attracting investment from China and other parts of Asia. That was sort of the focus area when I came in, and where our leadership wanted to put a lot of resources and attention. Some of the challenges that I referenced earlier is that finding data at the local level about FDI and whether, especially FDI and trade as well, it was very difficult to find the data. Sometimes when I was able to find a data set, it was incomplete or inaccurate. The other piece that was a challenge, and I think continues to be for work like this, is that validating the data and keeping it timely and accurate about who your foreign companies are that are operating in your community can be very, very time consuming. And I alluded to some of the work that we were tasked with earlier about filling buildings and diversifying our economy. And the reality was that this project of mine, which required a lot of staff time and focus, sometimes was put on the back burner as we were chasing companies to attract them to the county and had other competing projects with very tight timelines. The other challenge we had is this mentality, I think, that I was still sort of fighting against internally, which is that, well, look at who's here already. We have such a great product and location and infrastructure here and talent and community that, Arlington will just keep selling itself. And, do we really need a strategy? Do we really need to be proactive? And but I knew coming in, even before I started gathering data, just from my experience working in this region, that I was hard pressed to find one example of a Chinese company that was operating in Arlington County and doing well. When I looked at the resources that were very strong in cybersecurity, technology, services, those were not the areas, those were not necessarily aligned with the areas where I was seeing a lot of Chinese and Asian investment throughout the state of Virginia, for example, where I was seeing that in manufacturing and logistics and other types of industry. So this is a slide that talks a bit about the process that I undertook to start gathering this data and validating it. Some of these sources of data were mentioned in the previous presentation, but I started looking at what was available publicly. The Department of Commerce has a number of different data sources available. Again, foreign direct investment tends to be, in that case, at the state level. We have a sister agency at the state level, Virginia Economic Development Partnership, VEDP, also gathers data. Again, that's at the state level. What I was looking for was Arlington County, or at least the Northern Virginia region. Other sources like Brookings Institute had great data, Bureau of Economic Affairs. But again, drilling down to the local level was very challenging. So we also had some internal sources, including our internal database or Salesforce, where we capture information about foreign companies that we're working with in Arlington, any announcements that are made. But again, that was bits and pieces here and there where we knew about the project. In other cases, we didn't, if we hadn't interacted with a company and couldn't find a contact, we wouldn't have any data about their presence in Arlington County. So I set about a program to introduce ourselves to the companies that were operating here and try and gather information about jobs and capital investment, other economic indicators that we track. And last but not least, there are a number of different ways you can buy this data. So we met with a number of these vendors and third-party providers and ended up working with FT's FDI market data set. Again, this is available not at the level of Arlington, but more at the level of the MSA or the larger region. At the end of the day, this is after probably a good year and change, and I know Dale will remember, excuse me, working with me on this. We managed to procure a data set for not much money, a little over $1,000, to get all of this data and at the regional level. But once we had that, we had to compare that data against what we had been tracking internally in our database and what we knew. In some cases, the information that was recorded was inaccurate. For example, they would announce for Lidl's headquarters announcement in Arlington. The data that we procured from this source showed all of the statistics that were there at the time of the announcement, but not additional investments the company may have made or additional jobs had been created, and that's the area where we really needed to work to fill it out. And that is just really what that is just staff time. So it's having, someone there that's dedicated and focused on completing this data set. So that took the better part of my time. I was working on other programs, of course, but on the international strategy over 3 years, I'd say, and 2 interns who we got on board to help us with this important project. And the outcomes, which I think really proud of, is that I was able through this work to tell the story through data that we really needed to be focused on the investors largely from Europe, and I'll share on the next slide what that breakdown looks like for our foreign investors in Arlington County. And I was able to shift resources and attention to where I think they should be. We now have a large part of our international business attraction efforts are focused in Europe, Canada as well. And that was, partnered with NVRC to do some study tours and trips to Germany and really sort of dig in with these the largest investors in our community and see how we can expand that relationship. Was also able to leverage all of this data to create collateral that we could use in our missions, to put on our website, just some of these basic things so that people who are looking at our community and looking at landing here know, let's say an investor from France, they know how many other French companies are here, what industries they're in. And so this helped scale us up and really tell the true story about which countries are generating value and economic growth in our community. So this slide just shows the numbers. All of that totals to about 173 million of foreign direct investment over the 7-year period. You can see the bulk of it is coming from Germany. That's Lidl and a few other employers here from Germany. Switzerland is another big one. The bulk of that is Nestle, UK, and then other, and that other tends to be largely from Europe, UK, and Canada. So I think just application of this, it's been exciting. I know Dale and I have worked together to try and see how we could scale up the work and kind of follow in the footsteps of what we did here locally and expand that to a more regional basis. So we have put in an application together with NVRC to follow this process with the 10 jurisdictions that make up Northern Virginia. I will mention that it was actually a result in large part of working together with others in the region to win Amazon second headquarters. We had the opportunity to work very closely with some of our neighboring jurisdictions, and coming out of that process, when we came to the realization that really, which is something I knew from working on the international portfolio and from my background, but any investor from outside of this area, and especially from Europe or international, is not looking at the level of the jurisdiction. They're looking at the region as a whole and the strength of a region. And wouldn't it make sense to come together and join forces to market ourselves as a region within the US, but more importantly, internationally? So these 10 jurisdictions joined together in late 2019 and signed a memorandum of understanding to form what we call the NOVA EDA, which is the Northern Virginia Economic Development Alliance, which is the first regional economic development alliance of its kind. And so what we're really hoping is that this application and funding that we've received in partnership with NVRC can, once we gather this data in some similar ways that we did in Arlington County, that we can start to pull together the components to really see who's here, who's driving job creation and investment within our region, and use that as a basis for forming our international marketing strategy, our international business attraction strategy. Which countries do we want to travel to? Which trade shows, which industry trade shows in Europe should we be at to make sure that these high growth companies are aware of all the great things that are happening in our region here, right outside of Washington, D.C. I think from a practical standpoint, and I've talked to to Dale and team about this. My lessons learned having gone through this and tried to champion this through our organization, even with resources that we had, is that it takes a lot of maintenance, the validation of the data. If I think about what we went through in Arlington to make sure the data was accurate and maintained over time, it's a significant investment of time and resources, and the importance of having strategic partners like NBRC, the NOVA EDA, people, partners who are aligned on the need for something like this is critical. And then I think, as I mentioned before, just the regional focus. This is where I think the data really speaks, can really speak to an investor, is when you are able to show it on a regional basis. And I think that is the last, yes, that's the last slide of my presentation. Thank you again for the opportunity, and I would be more than happy to answer any questions or join the discussion.
That was absolutely fantastic. Thanks, Dan. Thank you so much, Marion. While we warm up for the Q&A box to get populated, I can't resist to exercise the prerogative of the moderator and just ask my first question also. It's to the two of you, I guess, starting with Dan, since your slide contained the reference, which is, you talked about the digital economy taking over the economy. And you can imagine that the ears perked up among the participants, given that we're the embodiment of the digital economy and the importance of that on the budgets of our local governments. So I guess my first question to you, Dan, is, given what you have seen in terms of the trends about the digital economy, what do you see? You speak obviously nationally, but what are some of the things that you begin to see about how the digital economy and this transatlantic relationship affecting local governments? Obviously, Northern Virginia and the United States is what we're interested in, but on both sides. And then maybe ask Marion to respond on the comments shared by Dan.
Well, thank you, Dale. Well, I think the first thing is companies looking, as I said, investment is the key driver here. So regions looking for foreign investors thinking of the digital future are going to be able to show how digitally adapt they are. Is the digital infrastructure in a region, world class? An investor is going to look at that because they're thinking of how they will operate in the future. I mentioned in passing, but I didn't dwell on it, is that much of the trade across the Atlantic is trade within the company. So it is Siemens Gamesa trading with itself. They send parts, components, send the digital things back and forth within the company. And so that's why investment flows are so important also to trade. So again, if a company is going to invest in a region in the United States, they're going to look at how easy, how frictionless can that trade happen. So any policies that enable more frictionless sort of connections that companies can interact with their own affiliates is really quite important. There are some elements at the national level that would help that to build down any, non-trade barriers that hamper those kinds of flows. But I think it's important, and I guess one way to think about it is flows today are what drives economies. How connected are you to others? The Cold War question was, what side are you on? Now it's, who are you connected to? And that's going to be critical going forward. And if you think about it in terms of, as I said, the services economy where most jobs are, that's increasingly a digital space. Most economists, when you talk about trade and services, have said, well, you can't really trade services, right? But that's increasingly not true because of the digital revolution. You just trade them in a different way. You hit you touch a button. And so, you can send an architect's plan across the Atlantic that's worth lots and lots of money, but it's not building a big thing. But in terms of high quality employment or construction, plans and things like that, that's services. and it's being done now digitally. And it's because of these intercompany links that make it so important for a particular region to be connected to those partners elsewhere.
And you got any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that is, digital economy and digital infrastructure is a big focus area for us in Arlington. I didn't mention it in my presentation, but we have just announced in the last year, so we partnered with one of the developers in our national landing area, which is Pentagon City, Crystal City, to work together to lay the foundation for the first 5G enabled smart city in that area. And that's kind of building, the county had access to dark fiber underneath the ground, and we're offering that as a lease to the developer to really start to build up what we think will be a very, very unique and attractive infrastructure and proposition for not just international companies, but these very high-tech nascent industries that we're looking to attract here from companies in Europe and Israel and other places where we know there's really interesting tech startups doing this work. So I think we're positioned well if that's the case. I mean, part of one of the challenges we had, I know, kind of measuring international trade coming into my role here was just that we are almost 100% services. Our economy here, we don't, in Arlington, as you know, if for anyone who's been here, we're not by and large not manufacturing anything good. It's no goods. It's more intellectual property and professional services. So I hope that positions us well with the trends that Dan was describing.
Thanks. I want to pick up also on a point, Dan, that you made just now about Siemens Gamesa and trading with each other, because it plays off an image that was shared multiple times in both your presentations, which was Amazon and the transatlantic energy economy. And given that Amazon had such a prominent role or position on that graph, and given that they play such an important role now that they have opened up or plan to open up their second headquarters here, but also that, we're the data center capital of the world. I was wondering if you had any thoughts, Dan, about this interplay. In other words, the ways in which Siemens Gamesa are using the transatlantic energy economic relationship, how that might have some kind of parallels or not within this really, really important economic attribute we have in our backyard.
Yeah, I think one important trend that is important to understand is the transatlantic digital economy. Everyone, when you think of the digital world, you think of space, that all these electrons are somehow flying through the air, but they're actually all going under the ocean. About 99% of all digital flows are under the ocean. And the digital connections across the Atlantic Ocean are by far the thickest in the world, and they are still on a faster growth trajectory than those being laid anywhere else in the world. And the interesting new dynamic is that the company, who is laying those cables? It is increasingly the Amazons of the world, Google, others, not the traditional backbone providers that, telecommunications companies. And so these companies, they need fast connections because what they call latency, sort of even a minuscule lag in speed can mean lots of money. And so they are laying their own cables and sort of business to business connections, interconnections they call them, where businesses can connect themselves across the Atlantic. Again, because they're in the same company, the company has to be able to do this. So they're bypassing the public internet. So this has lots of policy implications, but it's the reality at the moment that this new type of internet is being developed. That's a business to business system being driven by these digital companies that want to have this instantaneous kind of connection. So then you look at where are the hubs for those networks. In Northern Virginia, Virginia itself is one of the key global hubs for those networks. You mentioned your area, of course, with all this connection, but if you go to Virginia Beach, and so on. That's one of the landing points for a number of real important connections. And if you look at how this infrastructure is changing, the old way was the cable was laid from England to New York. And New York City became sort of the hub for much of the United States, frankly, when we started to lay cable lines, telephone, all of that stuff. And 9/11 drove home the point that this was a huge critical vulnerability the United States had, that we were so reliant on one hub for our digital connections. And so since then, the last 20 years, what you've seen is companies scrambling to get away from New York City. New Jersey has become another big hub out of New York. But just don't be reliant on one, all these connections leading to one office building in Manhattan. That's what the reality was. So Virginia is profiting from that because it's being considered now as another hub. And the more that this trajectory goes, that's something to capitalize on in terms of the links across the ocean. So I think for Virginia, it's well positioned if you can tell that story to people in ways that they get why they should care.
Any thoughts or responses, Marion?
No, I mean, I like everything that he said. That I think is just one more proof point, I think, to share with companies who are thinking about where to locate, on the Eastern Seaboard or throughout the U.S.
Let me carry a piece of that the conversation just a bit further. Lots and lots of talk has been given within transatlantic circles, and particularly in Dan's work, about the importance of a trained workforce. I know this is important for you, Marion. There's a huge demand for skilled workers, and it's unmet. And the stories that we hear from so many transatlantic, particularly US-German discussions, are the virtues of the dual system, the paid apprenticeships, and the harmonized accreditation systems. But it invariably, to me, seems to refer just to manufacturing. And we have no manufacturing. We're a service economy, as you said, Marion. So I'd like to turn again first to Dan to hear from you about your observations about how pieces, in the context of this economic relationship, the work between Germany and the United States, the work between the firms, these partnerships, are starting to pay off in terms of Americans adopting pieces of the dual system, but not as it relates to manufacturing. I think most of us are familiar with, Siemens and the manufacturing of gas turbines, and Bosch down in Charlotte, Piedmont Community College, among other examples. But how does this start to play out? What are the roles in which German firms in the service sector in places like Northern Virginia can start to weave elements of the dual system? And then I'd be interested in hearing Marion's comments and thoughts. And I have a question too about the reason why Hamburg was involved. And I can get to that after we hear from Dan and Marion.
I just wanted to, one last thing on that last point is, Europe's also changing the digital economy. I said the other link besides New York was to the UK, but the UK has now left the European Union. And so there is a second scramble happening, which is to lay cables directly to EU countries so that they're not all reliant on the transatlantic connections through the UK. So when I say who you're connected to, the other dynamic is who you're connected to in Europe. And there's a new scramble going on, Portugal, Spain, also in the Nordic countries to try to connect. Ireland now is in the EU. It's also close. It's also a hub of US companies. So there's another dynamic which I think is important to consider on the other end. On the workforce development and my take on the regional is we have so many sister cities, sister regions that we create, and they're all very nice. But the ones that have really been successful are the ones that add substance to that partnership. So not just send delegations across and have a nice day together or send school groups, this is all important. It's if you can build some substance that's meaningful to your region through that partnership. So workforce development has become an important pathway for the Transatlantic economy in ways that sometimes gets not noticed, at a national level. But for many regions, it's really quite important. And I think especially with Germany, Germany is also, we are both federal republics. We are both, countries in which the states play a big role. So if you think about training, education, in the United States, we have trouble connecting our education system to the economy. We have less mechanisms to do that well than in Germany, which is a system from the Middle Ages that's still engaged in that. And so, as Dale was, alluding to, maybe there's a way to learn from that, some learning, but that's going to happen at a state or local level. It's not a national German-U.S. thing. And some successful examples have been elsewhere in the country that I can, just give you an example. And the one I used is in Charlotte, North Carolina. So Charlotte, economy was textiles, timber, and tobacco. That was what drove the Charlotte economy for a long time, not the future industries of the world. And so they have shifted. They shifted to energy. They shifted to finance, and they shifted to foreign investment. And so during the recession in 2007 or 8, it was the foreign investment that saved Charlotte from the recession. Charlotte is the home of the most German companies in the United States. And it's because the region, the Charlotte region, the Carolinas partnership, sort of what you're talking about for Northern Virginia, decided to partner with the Karlsruhe region in Germany, near Stuttgart. And they started to talk about qualifications because there was so much German investment in Charlotte. The companies were hiring graduates from Central Piedmont Community College. But the people at Central Piedmont Community College weren't training their graduates in ways that German companies could understand. It was not a good match. So what the Carolinas Partnership did with the companies, the college, and the Karlsruhe Chamber of Commerce is they created a certification system by which the Karlsruhe certified that these community college graduates in North Carolina met the standards of German companies according to their education system. And so the companies got what they needed. The college could reframe its curriculum in ways that got their graduates good jobs. And it was a partnership between two regions. And so I think you can take that even to the services economy because there are many qualifications like that in that realm too. That just because it's manufacturing services shouldn't matter. The question is, can you create standards, metrics that the other side can understand that work for your graduates, for the people who are looking for jobs in your region, so they get good jobs. I think that's the key, workforce development. It's all going to happen in at your level, right? We can't wait for somebody in Washington to come up with this. Right. So I think there are lots of opportunities there. Hamburg is a major services hub. And so if links with Hamburg are, I think in particular, would be promising in that regard.
Marion, any thoughts, follow up to Dan's comments?
Yeah, I think, I think no conversation about economic future or performance would be complete without talking about workforce and talent. And there's a number of things happening regionally, on our team, since the time I joined, and this was a problem even before I joined in 2015, we're looking at ways we can compete for high growth and attract companies here that are high growth and retain them here. And the biggest challenge, and especially among the technology companies, that was always cited was technology talent and access to that talent. And that's not just a problem here, it's a problem around the world, a global challenge. And so we, on our team, there's a person who's dedicated specifically who comes from a talent recruitment background, that has joined and is also our liaison with all of our university partners. The two new big universities that are being built here, Virginia Tech Innovation Campus and George Mason University's Institute for Digital Innovation. Those are all part of the Amazon HQ2 pledge or package, but there's so much happening here in that space that we need to be on top of. And we understand, with access to talent and retention of talent being kind of the biggest pain point for companies, that we need to see what we can do at the local level to support that, of course, or to support regional, state, and federal initiatives. So we're actually currently working on a pilot project. This was something that we had taken to Go Virginia, Dale, the concept to see if we could get support for funding along with some of our partners in the region. But this is essentially a pilot project that takes an apprenticeship type model for the tech sector, particularly software development. We have all of these well-educated people in the community, many of whom were impacted by the pandemic, may have been working in nonprofits or the tourism sector and were laid off or are looking for work or looking to change careers as a result of the pandemic. And then we have this huge gap in demand for qualified technology workers on the part of our fast-growing companies that are hitting, the Fortune 500 and fastest growing company lists. And so we're thinking, what can we do to bridge that gap and adopt a more experiential learning approach? There are some companies that this is actually their business model. So these are kind of intermediary companies that have a book of business with, let's say, large companies like Deloitte or Capital One, companies that have a need for particular software or technology upgrade. And these smaller companies that we're working with on this pilot, they take, and they can be a student level, but down near Virginia Tech, they're doing this at the undergraduate level. In Arlington, they're doing it at a kind of experienced higher level, but they essentially take on someone with no professional background in technology, no certifications, work with them. It's a combination of curriculum and also on-the-job training. So let's say working for the Deloitte project with their own consultants and experienced workers, and coming up the curve that way and getting trained in not only the face-to-face setting of a professional environment, but on all of the technology skills that, as we know, change so rapidly that you kind of need, that on-the-job training, and then are getting job offers from those companies without having to kind of go through the formal recruitment process or not having the requisite certifications or years of experience or education on their resumes. And so things like this are, this is something we're doing that we committed funding to because we're hoping that it'll prove successful and that we'll have a role in helping to validate this business model that's out there so that employers who are in need of talent are not kind of risk averse or scared about hiring talent through a mechanism like that. We're trying to grow our own talent here, basically, because there's such a challenge, and it seems like this kind of industry-driven approach to education and training of workers is still not really working the way it should. Here, I know there's a lot of work underway within universities to shift that approach. But in the meantime, we've got vacancies and then a lot of people who are looking for gainful employment, and so. And there's other things going on regionally, like we have a Northern Virginia Technology Council that is got a big apprenticeship committee that's pulled together a lot of the tech employers in the region to focus on, what can be done. It's things that we talk about with companies like Amazon. They do a lot of that in-house because they basically have taken the approach of let's train our own people, and they have some really successful programs that they rolled out in the Seattle area and are now rolling out here. So I think this is another really great example of having to engage and make it happen at the local and regional level versus waiting for it to happen, from on high or from the federal level.
Thank you so much. Jennifer Pyler asks, I'd be interested in hearing more about why Hamburg specifically is connected economically to Northern Virginia. And the short answer is that there's anecdotal, there's the presence of Airbus, first of all, is the most direct connection. There's information that we hope to uncover about the depth of the relationship through this Go Virginia grant that we received, which we hope will make clear the dollars that flow geographically from Germany into the local governments of Northern Virginia, the numbers of jobs by sector. There's also a historic relationship. Well, there's also a contemporary energy sustainability, as Dan alluded. Hamburg is it was European environmental capital of the world, sustainability capital. They're doing remarkable work on climate resiliency, which would potentially inform flood mitigation planning for cities like Alexandria, counties like Arlington. They're doing incredibly innovative work on alternative fuel public transportation systems. They geographically are very similar to us, politically as well. It's a large city-state on a river with two states to the north and the south. But historically, the relations actually between Hamburg and Alexandria and Arlington predate that which we have right now with Stuttgart. The German Marshall Fund, when it was founded, the very, very first programs, in fact, were intended not to be focused on macro geopolitical. Guido Goldman expressly indicated that he wanted to focus on subnational, building on the spirit of the Marshall speech in 47, which also explicitly references work between people. But Guido Goldman and the very first initiatives that were undertaken looked at, for instance, the construction of the metro, design of the waterfront, case of Alexandria, and built this into some of the very first exchanges. He brought Mayor Beatley in the late 70s on some of these exchanges. So there's this historic set of ties and connections between the cities and the region that have been fruitful for now more than 4.5 decades. It looks like we're starting to run out of time. And I just wanted to say thank you for everybody that listened in on this, for taking part. I'm extremely grateful to Paul, Sabina, Jan, the team at the Konrad Adenauer Foundation that helped to put this on administratively. And I'm most thankful of all to Marion and to Dan for taking time from their really, really busy schedules to help us with this incredibly important work. It's super exciting, and I can't wait to do more work like this with you in the future. Thank you all very, very much. It's been a great afternoon, a great morning. Thanks to those of you listening in from Germany. Have a great afternoon.
Thank you, Dale.